He just looked as if he was sleeping. They had a tape around his neck. The gown came up to about here. You could still see the tape that they'd put on his neck. I stayed with him for a while. And then we went back out. And then other families start coming. Everything still seems so unreal.
Stephen Lawrence's ambition was to be an architect. He was 18 and studying for his A-levels.
It was no different to any other teenager. He was a happy person. He enjoyed life. It just seems so unfair.
Why do you think he was killed?
Because he was black, no other reason.
I still don't believe this is happening, in a civilized society like this, that anybody would go out and kill a person because they're black. That's no reason to kill anybody, because nobody chose the color that they come here. Nobody, not a white person choose to be white, or a black person, or Indian, or whatsoever.
Black and white friends mourned together as the Lawrence family confronted their son's murder, stunned that racial hatred could go to such extremes.
Anger, I've got more anger than anybody can think of. Because when you see a young boy, for no reason at all, he's been killed, for no other reason because he is black, and the way in which he was killed, these people didn't just stick the knife here and hoping it would do some damage. They severed the blood vessel in his neck, which went down and touched his lung. The other one in his arm touched his heart. Now this is vicious.
The family say the murder hunt was slow to start.
Witnesses that may have come along here on a bus or anything between about, say, 10:30 and 10:40 last week.
But within a week, a major investigation had begun. The police interviewed 2,500 people. They were aware that failure to catch the killers could damage their already fragile relationship with many in the black community.
Did you see?
I would describe it as a very brutal and mindless killing of a young man who had everything to live for, a young man who was clearly going places in life. What's more is the tragedy from a very well-integrated black family. I believe it to be racially motivated. Certainly all black people in the community too, and most other people who are unfortunate or fortunate enough to know the circumstances would regard it as a racial killing.
8 months later, sympathy, but no prosecution. 2 white youths were arrested, but though the police thought they had enough evidence to charge them, the Crown Prosecution Service dropped the case. Reflecting on the tragedy, the Lawrences are frustrated at the lack of results. It's made them sceptical of the government's commitment to fighting racist crime and critical of the Home Secretary. He recently visited London's Tower Hamlets after a serious attack on an Asian teenager.
I saw this video of him where he went to Tower Hamlets or wherever it is to visit. And his ideas, he said everything's fine. Everything's not bloody well fine. The people are out there suffering. Listen to the people on the street. There's no point in listening to people up in Parliament and in places like that. They don't know. You listen to the people and to the people that these things are happening to. All he does is a smile on his face and say that we're doing all we can. We are really committed to fight racism. This country is not committed to fight racism. They're not committed at all.
Well, we are certainly committed to taking effective action. And we are taking effective action. Now, the sad facts of the case involving her son are that the Crown Prosecution Service came to the conclusion that there wasn't sufficient evidence in relation to those who'd been arrested by the police to bring them before a court, to bring them to trial.
Stephen Lawrence's killing, marked here by a vigil where he died, was a brutal example of a common ill. Many influential people now believe racial crimes are so frequent that special and new powers are needed to deal with them. Nearly 8,000 incidents were recorded as racial by the police last year, but they're the tip of the iceberg, in the words of one chief constable. New, unpublished research by the Home Office estimates the figure is closer to 130,000. That's 400 racial incidents each day. A quarter are assaults, more than half threats or vandalism. One chief constable's told us the number of racial crimes reported is the tip of the iceberg, and another has told us the crime survey figures indicate underreporting, probably due to a lack of trust in the authorities. Do you accept that?
I think it's something which is getting much better. I think that the degree of trust which minority groups have in the police is growing. The police have certainly put a great deal of effort into building up that trust. I certainly wouldn't pretend that everything is yet as it should be.
This is Nottingham. Platform 2.
Evidence that everything isn't as it should be can be found in many cities in Britain. We went to Nottingham, where, as often happens, our first commentator was a minicab driver. Amjid Hussain drove us past the spot where an Asian driver was murdered last Christmas. He says he often picks up racist customers.
I mean, for instance, you pick a customer up, you're doing them a favour, taking them home, trying to just do your job, and at the other end they just, just walk out and say, fuck off your packy, get back to your own country or something. I mean...
And they don't pay?
They just don't pay and just walk out.
14, 7.
They think you're Asian, they think you're weak, and that's it. They just think, right, he's a packy, that's it. Forget him, you can't do anything about it, he's really soft.
Do you feel under threat because of that?
Yes, definitely. I think, you feel, you think to yourself, where have you gone wrong? I don't see why I'm not good as them.
It was in Nottingham a year ago that Amjid Hussain found himself involved in a particularly nasty and unprovoked attack. A year on, as the city prepares for Christmas, the case has just come to court. The attack happened late one Friday night. Amjid was in a car with a group of friends. Habib Ali, a student, was driving. He'd been delivering food for a local takeaway restaurant. But in a car behind, 5 white youths were following. He stalled and they dragged him from the car.
I started beating him up, kicking him, and the only thing I could do was just get on top of him and protect his head, because I seen him kicked him in his head, stamp on his head a couple of times. And then he just started beating me, punching me in my mouth, my eyes, my nose, my head, pulling my hair. All I was doing just trying to get my head, trying to cover it, I thought. And I was shouting, what have I done, what have I done? Then obviously my mate Amjad came running up. He asked him, what's the problem? And they just started abusing him, swearing at him, calling me, oh, you packy bastard, this, that. We don't want you in our country. And obviously I was like such a state of fright. I just didn't know what to do. One of them had my arms grabbed, other one was punching my face, other one was kicking me.
he was treated for a broken nose, but scars from the attack remain.
Now I'm frightened. I've got that fear in me that I can't do nothing alone. I have to have somebody with me all the time to protect me. And mostly I don't even go out anymore. Like, sometimes I can still feel that pain. Like, my nose is still there. If I look at the mirror, I keep thinking, I imagine it again, what's happened to me.
After the attack, a man was charged with causing actual bodily harm and a fray. But there was a second incident. It happened at the takeaway Habib delivered for. Abid Malik was cooking with a cousin. The car Habib had driven when he'd been attacked was parked outside. The man who'd assaulted Habib months before walked in.
He goes, this is that fucking red car. I go, which red car? He goes, that fucking Shroud. And like, my other cousin, Laka, he got up. He was driving that car that night. And he goes, what's up? And he goes, who's that car? And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. He started coming with racist comments, you packy, this and that. And then the chef told me to ring the police. So I just went into the back and I just sat down on the floor so he doesn't see me, so he doesn't vandalize anything. And then I heard some glass smash.
The glass food panel was broken and his cousin assaulted, though not badly. The man who'd attacked Habib was arrested in the street outside and charged again. On the day this attack came before magistrates, the charge of actual bodily harm was reduced to common assault. The court was told about the racial taunts. Nottingham magistrates have special guidelines which say if there are racial overtones to the crime, they should give a stiffer sentence. In the event, the assailant was ordered to pay £50 compensation, £65.80 to replace the glass panel, and given a conditional discharge.
It was drawn to my attention by the court staff as a surprising result in circumstances where they would have expected, and indeed the court indicated that usually a custodial sentence would result from charges like that.
What did you do about that?
I drew it to the attention of the Crown Prosecution Service because it seemed to raise questions about the prosecution of racially motivated offending.
The other assault, where Habib Ali had been dragged from his car and beaten, came up in the Crown Court last month. This time, the charge of actual bodily harm was dropped, and the assailant pleaded guilty to a fray. He could still have been sent to prison for this. Instead, he was fined £250 and ordered to pay £200 costs.
I was so angry, I couldn't believe it. I mean, you know, as soon as I heard the word fine, I just walked out of court. I said, Habib, he's got away with a fine. How? How? Why? I was just in tears. I put my head down. There's nothing I could say. I just was wordless. I couldn't speak. I just walked out.
Victims of many crimes can feel aggrieved at the justice system, but Habib Ali has a specific grievance. He feels the system didn't take full account of the racist nature of the crime against him.
Can I go straight on to Mr. Compton, Chief Counsel? Thanks very much, Milton. Can I, first of all, echo 2 points which have been made, that racial harassment is a problem which requires a
Nottinghamshire's Chief Constable is proud of the way his force handles racist crime. Today, he's at the launch of a special leaflet for victims like Habib.
Around a 45% success rate in detecting those that are responsible for racial harassment, and of course we're working to increase that percentage.
In theory, this force singles out racial crimes for special treatment. But Habib Ali's problems began with the initial police investigation. Chief Constable, having looked at the file in the case of Habib Ali, do you believe that this case was racially motivated?
Yes, I do believe that, and the words spoken on the occasion that the offence was committed, you could not come to any other conclusion that that was the motivation. And so I'm in no doubt in my own mind that it was a racial incident and would fall into the criteria that we describe nationally and locally.
In this force, all allegations of racism should trigger a specific response. Despite the anti-racist stance spelled out in the new leaflet, this didn't happen in our 2 cases. Officers should fill in special forms to ensure investigations of racial incidents are monitored and followed up. but they didn't do so after either attack.
I do see that as a mistake, and whether a racial incident amounts to a criminal offence or not, a form should be completed, because otherwise it can distort our total figures recorded at the end of the year. But I think in terms of justice to the victim, where somebody's been arrested and they're being placed before the court, our prime responsibility is to ensure that the racial dimensions surrounding that incident are included in a prosecution file, and that was done in this case.
What didn't go into the prosecution file was this police photograph of Habib Ali's injured face. The police told us it didn't exist. Only at our repeated request did they uncover it in their archives. And because they didn't check with the hospital, there was no medical evidence. When Panorama approached the hospital on Habib Ali's behalf, we were given this accident and emergency report, which shows he had a fractured nose. The police weren't the only ones to make mistakes. The Chief Crown Prosecutor for the East Midlands admits one of his lawyers also slipped up. Police files on the attack and the takeaway weren't handed to the lawyer on time. The lawyer didn't notice the man due up in the magistrate's court was already on bail for the previous attack on Habib.
If the two had been connected and the prosecutor had had the file in time, she would not have dealt with the case then. She would have asked for an adjournment, and the two cases would have been dealt with together as one incident, so that the court would have had the full picture.
And what effect would that have had?
Well, it would have meant that the court sentencing the defendant would have known that the defendant had been involved in and was guilty of two separate racially motivated incidents, and the matter would have been dealt with more seriously. The cases were connected, and I regret that they were not linked.
Better monitoring of the police investigation and extra vigilance by prosecutors may have brought a different outcome for Habib. But he was most disappointed that the judge appeared to dismiss the racial factors, and the prosecution didn't challenge this. He'd hoped the judge would highlight the racial aspects.
They didn't even mention nothing about that. Obviously, I had witnesses, I had everything, but they just didn't mention anything. And as far as I'm concerned, the law in my eyes, I don't look up to it as I used to.
4 years ago, Home Office researchers also expressed concern, citing reports of instances where CPS lawyers had not brought out racial motivation as an aggravating factor once the case came to court, resulting, so it was believed, in less severe sentences for the offenders. In Nottingham, court officials say that's still a concern. Further evidence, says one insider, of how inadequately racial crimes are processed.
The system as a whole is failing to deal properly with racially motivated offences. It's not identifying them, it's not prosecuting them, and it's not convicting them satisfactorily enough.
Even one of the most senior judges in the land accepts there are flaws in the way racial incidents are dealt with. Judges are now going on courses to improve their racial awareness.
I think there must be some racial prejudice in us all. What I'm hoping is that there is no direct conscious racial prejudice. Those who now live in this country as part of ethnic minorities must be assured that they're going to get fair treatment by the courts. And if they're treated in a way which is offensive to them, then they'll feel they're not getting that fair treatment.
Do you, in fact, believe they have lost faith in the system?
No, I don't believe that they have lost faith, but there are a number of people who will quite justly complain about their treatment.
Because of complaints like this, some people now believe explicit guidelines are needed. In Nottingham, magistrates have their own rules which single out racial attacks. But nationally, that's not the case. Nothing in these sentencing books for judges or these guidelines for magistrates tells them that racial motivation of itself should trigger a stiffer sentence. One chief constable feels so strongly about this, he's suggesting changes in the law. Paul Whitehouse recently represented the Association of Chief Police Officers before a committee of MPs investigating racial incidents.
I believe it is essential that the court, if there is a finding of guilt, should take into account any evidence that shows that the offence was racially motivated.
Do you think there should be a change in the law?
If there needs to be a change in the law because that's the only way forward, yes, I consider it's important enough to justify such a change.
I think it would be very difficult to insist that someone convicted of a racially motivated offence should in all circumstances get a higher sentence than someone convicted of an elderly woman, defenceless, living alone who happened to be white, that I don't think it's sensible to pass a law to that effect.
It would show a commitment on your part, though, would it not? It would send a message to black and Asian people in Britain.
I don't think that it's the kind of message which most people would want to see given.
In the royal borough of Windsor and Maidenhead, there's a peer of the realm who does believe that message should be sent. Baroness Flather, like the Home Secretary, is a conservative. She argues she doesn't want other crimes treated lightly. She wants to ensure racial crimes are always treated seriously. Baroness Flather was Britain's first ever Asian woman councillor and served as mayor at the Guildhall here in Windsor.
I think it's worth sending out a signal. I mean, that is where I differ from the Home Secretary. I think it is worth sending that signal. When an old lady gets beaten up, there's hue and cry, and people don't accept it. And that is not to be accepted. But it's no different to the racist attacks suffered by people every day.
Baroness Flather speaks from experience. She and her family were attacked as they sat in their kitchen one night. A metal bar came flying through the window, narrowly missing her son. Racist graffiti aimed at her white husband was daubed on the garden wall.
Most people's perception of racial attacks is inner cities. It's certainly more prevalent in the rundown areas. It's certainly more prevalent on council estates. But it's not limited to that. There are people in all sorts of places who can be targets of attacks, like we have been.
As a public figure, Baroness Flather is used to getting racist hate mail. These are just some of the letters she's received.
They say, we don't want your sort here. That's quite common. Go back to where you've come from, and we know where you live.
Do you think that you're likely to get reaction through the post by appearing on this programme?
I wouldn't be surprised, because it usually happens after I make a speech or I appear on a television programme.
Baroness Flather, who's lived in Britain most of her life, accuses her peers of being complacent about racism.
People who are insulated from racial attacks, they never even think about it. But it's all being done in their names, and they are the ones who should be raising their voices.
But what difference will it make if people do, whether people do or don't speak out?
It'll make a difference to me. I shall feel that there are people who are standing with me, saying that we don't want this. But I don't see them. I look around. I don't see the chattering classes, as they've come to be known in this country. I don't see the establishment standing up to be counted against racial attacks.
Wherever you live, whether it's Royal Berkshire or a London estate like this, it's not only physical attacks that can make your life a misery. It's also smaller things like abusive name-calling. When it's persistent, it can be just as distressing. A growing number of reformers now believe this kind of racial harassment should be a specific crime. Persistent racial harassment has devastated this woman's family life. Her story begins 18 months ago and shows how if you ignore the seemingly little things, they can build into serious problems. The family's troubles started with petty vandalism and name-calling. Three times banana skins were left on Leanne Udioba's car, but it didn't stop there.
I had doubts in my mind with this banana thing, and then it 3 weeks ago, I found a note on my car, and I realized that, no, it's not my imagination. They aren't just picking on me. This is a racial thing now. It says something, go back to your hole, you black bee, B-I-T-C-H. I mean, they're telling me to go back. Go back where? I mean, I was born here and everything like that. Where I agree my parents came from another country, but it's not my home there. I don't know anybody there. And I have this note now. It's like you have nowhere to turn, no one to turn to. I feel like an animal in a cage, really.
Leanne's home is like a fortress. There was an attempted break-in. Now she barricades herself inside. She hadn't reported the earlier events. She didn't think the police would take them seriously. But one morning, as she put her children in the car, something far more alarming happened.
I turned around for my daughter, and then I heard this noise behind me. And when I looked, there's glass all over the place.
Someone had thrown a bottle at them.
My daughter could have been killed last week. I'm not talking about injured. She would have been killed. She's only 10 months old. She doesn't have a clue of what is going on. She isn't even aware of this issue of black and white people. And for somebody to actually throw down a bottle into the car when probably my baby would be sitting there, that is absolutely wicked.
Leanne Udeoba is now living on her own. Last month, frightened for their safety, she sent her children to live with their father nearby.
To be black and living here, you're scared because you don't know who you're talking to, who you're passing, who likes you, who hates you. You don't know where you stand. It's really terrible.
Nearby, at Plumstead Police Station, there's a special unit, one of the few in the country, trying to dispel this climate of fear. These two men are its troubleshooters. Today, in the interview room, they're questioning someone about an attack on a black driver.
I'm PC 834 Ian Richardson, attached to the Plumstead Police Station.
The police told Panorama people rarely admit they're racist.
The majority of cases, they'll just deny it. They'll say, yeah, perhaps I did call him black bastard or whatever. But they'll turn around and say it wasn't the result of racial motivation, it was because I was angry and I just used those words.
In Plumstead, they claim to be more effective than anywhere else in London because they have a specific unit to target racist crime.
Chat inside, so be drawing attention before.
Mr. Bart and his family need help. They've put up with persistent harassment for months.
How did they do this? Do you see how they did it?
They just kicked with the food, you know, because they know this is our house, Indian house, you know. They don't like us, no? You know what I mean?
Egg throwing, verbal abuse and vandalism have finally worn them down. Lately, children have been ringing the bell, then throwing in eggs as they answer the door.
Again, what we're doing. We know about this Sunday and what happened this Sunday, and it happened the Sunday before and the Sunday before that.
3 Sunday continuous in a row.
It's not one, but a number of Asian families being hounded. It's even stopped them worshipping together.
Have a lot of people stopped using the temple because of all
Yes, yes. We just keep at homes, you know, and we don't want to go anywhere because they don't let us walk on the road.
When you see the people who use the temple, tell them to phone police if they've got troubles. Because if they don't, we don't know about it.
One incident has left a neighbour frightened to go out.
That person abused me. Oh, you bloody fucking you get lost, you leave our country. You bloody Paki, get away. And he spitted bit quiet.
It's very important that if you get these problems of people spitting on you and throwing stones or whatever, you must contact the police as soon as you possibly can.
But she hasn't had much luck reporting incidents before.
Policeman said from this Thamesmead police station that we are busy, sorry, we don't have time, and we will come whenever we get time. And they never turn up.
I get annoyed when I hear that from people. I mean, obviously, if the incident's happened, then there might not be a need to rush here if all the boys have gone, but they should be coming and sorting out what's happened here.
Rachel Winston's Plumstead.
Officers complain it's not always their fault if nothing's done. It's the law that's lacking. Some forms of harassment aren't arrestable offences, some aren't even crimes. In Plumstead, they keep a tally of racial incidents. Red for assault, yellow for criminal damage, orange, threatening and abusive behaviour.
Okay, well, perhaps you could see us about that later on.
In legal terms, some of the racial incidents, some of the racism that's reported to us falls into a sort of a grey area. It isn't crime per se. It is low-level but persistent racism of a very casual sort, but very debilitating to the people who are the victims of it. It's the sort of name-calling, the gesture-waving, it's the rubbish tipped into the front garden, all of the sort of things that actually ruin somebody's quality of life.
Given the Prime Minister's urge to go back to basics, basics, in my view, are the treating of every individual person as an individual person. And racism denies that, so it must be right to have an offence of racial harassment. It goes to the very heart of a civilised society. We are a free society in which all people are entitled to equal treatment. If we demean an individual on account of their race, then we are demeaning a whole group of people.
There is already a draft bill circulating amongst supporters of a new law. It would create an offence of racial harassment. This would be similar to existing public order offences, but with the threat of arrest and a 2-year prison sentence rather than a fine. It would also ensure racial evidence was brought out in court and would increase the severity of sentences for racially motivated attacks. A host of people have been trooping to the House of Commons, telling politicians why the new law's needed. A committee of MPs is currently investigating racial attacks and harassment. The Commission for Racial Equality, the Anti-Racist Alliance, and members of the justice system itself are now calling for change. There's even interest from an appeal court judge.
On the general rule, as I say, I think the statutes are perfectly adequate to deal with this particular problem as with the others that involve violence. But harassment is a rather more difficult one, and I would like to look at it. One can think of circumstances where harassment might not be covered by existing statutes, and therefore a further piece of legislation might be required.
A racial harassment law would mean that in cases like Habib's, the racial context would automatically have to be fully investigated in court and taken into account when sentencing. It would mean the person who sent the racist note to Leanne could be sent to jail instead of just fined. But as the cases we've investigated show, effective enforcement is essential. No law will work without that.
Obviously, if once the law is passed and it's not actually put into practice by the people like the police and various groups, then it wouldn't have been any use. But I always believe that the clear messages that these things send out are very important.
The best way in which we can achieve the objective which both Baroness Flather and I wish to achieve is to have the existing law properly enforced and to have people brought to book. Plumstead is an excellent example of the way in which we can send out and are sending out signals to members of ethnic minorities that we do take offences which are directed against them very seriously. The best reassurance for them is the conviction of the people who are guilty of these attacks, not the creation of some new law which will be more difficult to prove than the existing law.
A new law may not bring Stephen Lawrence's killers to justice, and it would be harder to prove the racial aspect. But those who disagree with Mr. Howard argue that challenge could be met with a deeper commitment from the justice system. Today, the Lawrences doubt that commitment exists and feel unprotected.
The justice system is saying to the white kids out there, you can do whatever you like to black people, and we're not going to do anything to you.
A new law couldn't make up for inadequacies in enforcement, but it might signal not just to victims or even perpetrators, but to the police, the prosecutors and the courts that Britain must not allow racial attacks or harassment to be a crime unpunished.